Well, welcome to our final lecture on the history of Texas. If you reflect for a moment, we have covered a tremendous amount of material in this brief survey course. We started with the indigenous people in Texas, the Indians. We looked at the arrival of the Spanish. We looked at Texas as part of the Spanish Empire on the very northern fringe of that empire. Then we looked at Texas for about 15 years, part of the new independent country of Mexico. Then, of course, Texas as its own independent country, the Republic of Texas. Then Texas became a state in the United States. Then Texas, 15 years later, decided to leave the United States to join the Confederacy. Then Texas rejoined the United States after the Confederacy. And then we saw Texas going through Reconstruction, the Progressive Era, World War I, the Roaring Twenties, with the Flapper Girls, jazz, the impact that had, the rise of the Ku Klux Klan in the 1920s, the Great Depression, World War II, Texans' participation in World War II. Then we looked the entire period since World War II up to 2000, a tremendous time period, many changes for the state of Texas. And now we're going to look just very briefly at Texas in the new millennium, in the 21st century. Well, when Texas, throughout its history, but of course, over the last 20 years, there are a lot of important public policy issues facing the state, not just Texas, but all the states in the country. And these issues, which range from immigration to economic development, they really have polarized the national politics of the United States, and you see that reflected in Texas. And so Texans are divided between self-identified conservatives, self-identified liberals, and of course there's a good number of independents in between those two. And there's also a major divide between rural voters, suburban voters, and urban voters who live in the cities themselves as opposed to the suburbs. You also see divisions by generations. You see divisions by racial and ethnic groups. So there are a lot of divisions dividing Texans, as in the rest of the country. And this polarization has become, in my view, more intense over the last 10 to 15 years, both nationally and in Texas. Well, the phrase "gone to Texas" still applies. This is population growth from 2010 to 2020. As you know, the United States government conducts a national census every 10 years, and the last one was conducted in 2020. You can see this is by county, and the red colored counties lost between 13 and 29% of their population. And you can see those are, clearly rural counties, many of them in South Texas. The other extreme, the counties in blue, increased their population over this short 10-year period by between 30 and 53%. And there are 14 such counties. And the next highest category is in the dark green. That's between 15 and 30%, and that's 23 counties. And glancing at the map without going into detail, you can see that those counties are really focused around the three large metropolitan areas of Houston, Austin, San Antonio is sort of one continuous area there, and then Dallas, Fort Worth. And on this map, they're they've placed a triangle connecting those three population centers that have experienced tremendous amount of growth. Well, as a result of the 2020 census net rather, which of course is conducted across the United States, every 10 years when the census result comes out, there is a recalibration of the seats in the U.S. House of Representatives. The number of seats stays constant. And a state like California, which actually lost relative population compared to the United States, California lost one seat in the House of Representatives. That seat went to Texas, and Texas also picked up a seat from another state that had relatively less population growth. So the net result of the 2020 census was that Texas acquired 2 additional seats in the U.S. House of Representatives. And this gives Texas also 2 more votes in the all-important Electoral College, which of course ultimately determines presidential elections. Now, looking briefly over the last 20-something years, the state has been pretty much solidly Republican since 2001. In 2002, a new Republican Senator, John Cornyn, was elected, and he's been reelected 3 times, and he still serves in the U.S. Senate. U.S. Senator Kay Hutchinson was elected in 1993 and served for 20 years until she left the Senate in 2013. And her seat was taken by another Republican, Ted Cruz, who was elected in 2013, reelected, and still serves in the U.S. Senate. So both Texas senators in Washington are Republicans. Now, looking briefly at the governorship, the Republican Rick Perry was elected in the year 2000, and he served until 2015. And then he was succeeded by another Republican, Greg Abbott, who was elected in 2015 and still serves, and he's up for re-election in 2022. Over this period, the Democratic Party has not won any statewide elections. However, Democrats still serve as mayors in all the large cities, Houston, Austin, San Antonio, Dallas, El Paso, etc. And they also head many urban county governments as commissioners or county judges. And that's what they call the head of the county administration in Texas. But in Austin, in the state legislature, Republicans have dominated in both legislative houses. This would be the Texas Senate and the Texas House of Representatives. And the congressional delegation to Washington, the many representatives from Texas, there are Democratic representatives, but the majority are Republicans. And finally, as I mentioned a few moments ago, as a result of the 2020 census, Texas has picked up 2 additional electoral votes. So now it has 38 votes in the Electoral College, second only to the state of California. So Texas is clearly a key state, which both with presidential candidates in both parties are very, very eager to win. And so we have, in the next presidential election, I think you'll certainly be seeing great focus on Texas. And before that time, many candidates will be of both parties will be looking to Texas to make gains. Well, thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed the course.